In this chapter, we're going to learn how CSS is applied. But before we get started, I want to show you some things about CSS, just as I did in the last intro for the XHTML and HTML section, because I want you to understand what some of the terminology is and some of the things we're looking at are. Essentially, the way that CSS works, you'll have noticed that in HTML and XHTML files, there would be an element, body, or an H1 element, or an H2 element, and so forth. Well, these become selectors in CSS, and there are all kinds of selectors, and you're going to see some pretty complicated selectors as we get more and more advanced in what we're doing. And again, there's some very helpful resources there to give you more information on what selectors are. In this case, we're selecting the body. We're saying we would like this CSS rule to be applied to the body of the document that we're styling. Now, this is a CSS rule. A CSS rule is made up of the selector and the declaration block. That's everything that goes in between the curly quotes. And each declaration block contains at least one declaration, but can have many declarations. In this case, we've got the font property shorthand. This is a property in a shorthand form. And then all of the values that go along with that property. So a property and property values make up a declaration. Multiple declarations, which are separated, notice, by the semicolon, make up the declaration block. And you'll notice that we have used a semicolon at the end of all of our declaration blocks. Technically speaking, this is not necessary to do. However, both Andy and I feel it's a best practice because you never know when you're just going to need to pop in and add another declaration. And if you haven't put this in here and you forget about it, that could cause you some errors. So go ahead and always get used to just adding that in there, and it doesn't cause you any problems and it reduces errors in the future. Another thing I wanted to point out here is that not only can we write CSS in the way that you see it here, and you'll also see it done different ways too. You'll see indentation of this nature that I'm doing right now, and some people drop this all the way over here. This was a very common way of working with CSS in the past. People still do it. However, one of the things we found is that by putting our declarations all into one line and just writing line by line, which is something you'll see us doing a great deal of, you can really reduce a lot of file weight. One of the interesting things is you think that file weight came from code, but all that white space, getting rid of it, can reduce the size of your file significantly, and as a result, you get all of those wonderful return on investment benefits that we were discussing earlier.
It's important to strike a balance between the file weight and the readability of the CSS files as well. I often get very confused with this type of terminology or nomenclature.
He can't even say the word. He gets so confused with it.
Say the word, please, Molly.
Nomenclature.
Nomenclature. In terms of the differences between a rule or a declaration or a property. So if you hear me say one thing throughout this presentation, I'll probably call everything a rule. But please remember to come back to this chapter and then you'll know more than I do at the end.
Yeah, I often have to correct him.
There are a lot of different properties and a lot of different values in working with CSS. So we've provided some files in the source directory and also additional references available on the bookmarks.html file to give you further information about the type of properties and values that we're going to be talking about here on the title.
Yeah, as well as the selectors, because there are many, many types of selectors. We're using right here very simple element selectors, but as things progress throughout the chapters, it will get more complex.
So let's crack on.